Good evening. I want to thank the leadership of this conference for allowing me to have a few moments with you tonight. First of all, I want to make sure I give a disclaimer before I start. First of all, I think it's pretty phenomenal that I'm the opening act for a general, and so I just want to say that. So that's like, my wife will actually love me more now because of that. And also, John Wood had some very kind words a few moments ago for me, and one of the things that he shared is that I'm a humble guy. I'm just going to, and I want you to know, I'm not trying to be jokey about what I'm getting ready to say. I appreciate him, and I'm so encouraged that he would think that. The bottom line is, I'm not. I'm one of the biggest egomaniacs that I know. Every day, I've got to die to myself. Now, before you think that I'm just doing a pity party for me, that's your story too. And so here's the biggest act of leadership, the hardest act of leadership is honestly first leading ourselves. And so here's what I want to do. I want to go to John 21. I'm going to go to John 21, and there's lots of leadership, students, that really occurs in what we just call simply strategic conversations. Sometimes we make this issue of leadership and influence with other people a little bit more complicated. Many times, influence and leadership happens in little pockets throughout our day, and you can't discount the power of, again, strategic conversations with other people. Let me give you the context of this strategic conversation. This is after the resurrection of Christ, and there's been one time where the disciples have seen Jesus, have been in a home in a very, very quick fashion. And then eventually what they all do, Peter and the disciples go and fish. Well, it doesn't occur very well. They don't catch anything. Jesus comes to them on the side of the lake, and here's what happens. He calls to them, and so eventually they realize that it's Jesus. And then they end up eating together, and then there's a strategic conversation. There's a very, very strategic conversation. I don't know. I grew up in a family that we didn't do conflict well. Like if there was conflict, I mean, we're like, oh. But then here is a conversation, and we have to have the talk because there's a guy by the name of Simon Peter. You see, as you go through the Gospels, you see that Simon Peter got to be part of certain things in his life that only you and I could dream about. Dispensing food to thousands and thousands of people that Jesus was miraculously multiplying. Walking for a few steps. He sunk, but he walked for a few steps. Witnessing people coming back from the dead. In other words, we would all pray for the occurrences that Simon Peter had in his life. We also know on the other end that Simon Peter was also made of the same stock as you and I, who would also say to the Lord, I will never betray you. I'll never break a promise to you. And what does he do? He betrays him, and he breaks the promise. So here they are. They're eventually on the side of the lake, and they're eating together, and nobody's talking, right? Nobody's talking. And then this moment occurs. I'm just going to read in this passage, John 21, 15 through 22. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who also leaned back against him during the supper and said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Let me tell you about the first time I learned about leadership. I wish I could tell you it was from reading Kouzes and Posner's book, Leadership Challenge. And it was from Jim Collins, Good to Great. And it was all these great books and Christian literature about leadership. I wish I could tell you that that's where I learned leadership. I actually learned leadership from a girl by the name of Julie Freiberg. Let me tell you a little bit about Julie Freiberg. I had a crush on Julie Freiberg. I was in 6th grade. She was a senior in high school. And so, yeah, don't laugh, my life. And so I really, really, really loved Julie Freiberg, and I had a big crush on her, and I'm just not going to go into detail. I just liked her. And so there was this one moment when I was in 6th grade, and our basketball team was actually doing fairly well where I'm from, and so we had a pep rally. And so in our little small town, there's not much to do, so everybody comes to the pep rally. The gym was stocked with people, and the team gets up there, says what they're wanting to do, and introduce all the team members, introduce all the cheerleaders. And so near the end, the cheerleaders, I think what they were trying to do is like get everybody jazzed, get everybody excited. So what they did is they formed like this conga line. They formed this line that kind of was like a centipede that went all around the gym, and they're trying to get people to come out of the stands, right? To just get behind them first, and somehow we'll win the ball game, if we do this. And so we're really excited. So here I am, and excited. But here's what's really cool: the last cheerleader in line was Julie Freiberg. And so here I am in all my 6th grade prepubescent self, and I'm looking at Julie Freiberg in all of her glory, and I'm going, I really want Julie Freiberg. And and here's the deal. It was horrible. Nobody's coming out. It's very embarrassing, and nothing was going on. And then in this moment, I find myself getting up. On my 6th grade self, hundreds and hundreds of people, and I tear out of the bleachers, and I catch up with Julie, and I put my hands on her hips. This is great. And electricity just went throughout my, and so anyway, so here I am, and I'm following Julie Freiberg around, and she's like looking back, and then she has to look down because I'm in 6th grade. And so, and here I am, and I'm running around with Julie Freiberg, connected to Julie Freiberg, and then I looked up in the bleachers, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden, people started standing. I looked up and I saw the superintendent rip his tie off and he comes running out of the bleacher. Old ladies who were in the faculty who I didn't think could move were coming out of the bleachers. And then people were connecting to me, and people were connecting to them. And then in no time, the gym floor was stocked with people. We couldn't even run anymore because of that. Later on, somebody comes up to me, and they said this: "Rob, you are such a leader." Here's what's funny. I wasn't trying to be a leader. Do you know why? I was just in love with Julie Freiberg. Right? I want to challenge you to something tonight that's probably going to sound like it's going against the grain of this conference. I want to actually challenge you to not be a leader. I challenge you to be a lover first. That's what I want to challenge you to do. Because, see, we, as disciples of Jesus, it's really not about leadership, is it? It's about a person. And my prayer for you and I is that we will be so entranced with Jesus that leadership just comes out in the wash. Because it is amazing when you are filled with His Spirit and when you have been redeemed by the blood of Jesus and He invites you into His life, other people will follow. But it's not because you're wanting to be a leader. It's because you're a lover of Christ. First thing I want to talk about tonight is the heart of leadership. Here's what's interesting. Jesus can say anything to Peter that he wants. He's Jesus, right? Jesus is also in his deity knows not only the heart of Peter, he knows what's ahead of Peter. And if you ever go through the book of Acts, you see that Simon Peter has to navigate immediately all kinds of issues. Preaching in the portico, before councils, being beaten, having to make decisions, eventually in the Jerusalem council. The future ahead of Peter is so convoluted and so complicated, and please don't take this as a downer. Your future, my future, is so convoluted and so complicated, we have no clue what's even going to happen tonight. But Jesus knows. And of all the questions, all the things that Jesus could ask and say to Peter, he actually what? Asked him 3 questions. And you really don't have to do a lot of Greek exegesis to understand these questions. Simon, son of John, what is it? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Be a lover before you're a leader. Here's the tragic condition of modern day leadership. Many people are more in love with being a leader than in loving the people they lead. That's the big tragedy in modern leadership. Many people are more in love with being a leader than in loving the people that they lead. I want to confess something to you tonight. I wasted a large bulk of my vocational ministry because I was obsessed with being a leader. I bought every book that I could get my hands on about leadership. I even went and got my PhD literally in leadership development. I was obsessed with leadership. I podcast leadership. I read blogs about leadership. And here's the thing, one thing I didn't realize, and it was starting to be very, very subtle, is that my desire for leadership had eclipsed a heart of love. Students, you will undermine your influence. You will undermine the way that you are able to carry along other people along the journey when you no longer love God. And what is vicious about this? Let me tell you what's vicious. When your love of God becomes basically like a little pilot light, you can run on that for years and nobody else will know. And eventually, it'll undermine your life. There are some of you here tonight that you are going to fall morally in the future. And it's all going to come down to, not because you didn't have good leadership strategy, it's because of the heart. Some things I wrote down for this because out of my own experience. If love is not the catalyst for our leadership, then our leadership will use people as pawns for our own self-glory. When we don't love God, when we're not trying to pursue after God, no matter the crazy journey that He may take us on, here's what's going to happen. You will use people as pawns for your own self-glory. Well, it doesn't matter if it's Christian leadership or not. When we do not love God and really love other people, we will eventually use them. Oh, here's another thing. When love is not there, we will care more about people's performance than their personhood. Folks, every person we influence has been created by God. They've been made in the imago Dei. They're made in the image of God. We don't associate with just robots or pawns, but people. People matter to God. And so when the heart of leadership is not there, we will care more about people's performance than their personhood. And here's the other thing. We will also command people more than invest in them. When you don't love God, and when that doesn't translate into loving other people, we will command people more than we will actually invest in them. Here's another thing I just want to encourage you with tonight, that if love is not the catalyst for our leadership, then our leadership will stamp the people we lead with our own loveless leadership. It will stamp the people we lead with our own loveless leadership. Have you ever read that part in Matthew 23? It's very sobering. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and the scribes. This is what he says to them. This is what he says. He goes, you, talk to the Pharisees and the scribes, you will travel land and sea, making other people twice the child of hell that you are. Is that not crazy? Now listen, you got to understand, Pharisees were looked at as leaders. Scribes were very, very revered because of copying the Old Testament over and over and over again. They were basically the gatekeepers of their culture, and Jesus says to them, when you lead, basically, and you influence like you are, you will make them twice the child of hell that you are. Every one of us in this room is going to influence other people. The question is, who are we influencing them toward? So the heart of leadership. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? You and I are going to face issues that we do not have the bandwidth to know how to navigate. No matter how much education that you have, I am telling you, life is that crazy. And the first question when those issues come is simply this: do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? This is something I haven't even shared at the church that I serve. This past fall was one of the hardest times in my entire life. There was actually a point where I was asking the Lord on a continual basis this past fall. I said, Lord, would you please keep me out of the hospital? There were moments where I noticed where I would go for a drink, and I would notice that my hand would just be shaking and twitching. I was going through many nights where I would go to bed exhausted, get a full 8 hours, and wake up absolutely exhausted. And then there was these haunting words in a beautiful way. Rob, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? See, once we understand the heart of leadership, then we can probably go ahead and answer the next one. But before I do, I want to remind us that Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:14, for the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. Paul prayed for the church at Ephesus in Ephesians 3:17-19, when he says, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God. And then, once we understand that leadership is first, not necessarily about leadership, but it's about being a lover of Christ, a pursuer of Christ, then we're able to define the task of leadership. Here's what's interesting. He says, do you love me? Peter says he does. And Jesus over and over again reiterates this: feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. It's the task of leadership. Hey, if there's one dichotomy that we need to blow out of this place and let it not be part of the lexicon of our lives, is this. I would argue in a modern American culture, we have put a dichotomy between two words: leadership and discipleship. Leadership is one thing, discipleship is another. Leadership is only what certain people do. Discipleship is what everybody should do, but we're not doing it very well. You must understand When we are doing leadership, we are doing discipleship. There's never a dichotomy. Leadership development is just an extension of discipleship and influencing people to follow hard after Jesus. And again, I reiterate, Peter's going to be be parts of all kinds of issues, making all kinds of decisions, even has a conflict that he has to walk through with Apostle Paul. And you see it as you go through the scriptures. But all of that comes under the purview of tending sheep, feed my lambs. The task ultimately of leadership is really to help point people to the greatest being ever. Obviously, as followers of Christ, we're coming alongside other followers of Christ and helping each other become more and more conformed to the image of Christ. Please know this, that if you're working with unbelievers, many of you, by God's grace, this is so wonderful, your degrees are going to fling you all over this world, and they're going to put you in all kinds of lanes of careers. That is wonderful. But please remember this. You must look at your job description, no matter where it's coming from, if it's on the confines of vocational ministry or if it's ministry outside the stained glass windows. Remember, on top of all of our job descriptions is to make disciples. And when you and I are influencing unbelievers, do you know what we're doing? We're doing something called pre-discipleship. We're living life before them that's honoring to Christ. The way that we speak, the way that we care, our countenance, the way we deal with conflict, all that matters. All that matters. Because ultimately, we're not at our jobs for the bottom line. We're not at our jobs for some type of status. We're not at our jobs because it moves us to a certain place geographically in this nation. We are ultimately at our jobs, what? To be a disciple and to make disciples. The task of, but see, here's the deal. We're not going to catch this unless we got the heart. The heart of leadership that defines for us the task of leadership. But this has already been alluded to. See, when we have the heart of leadership, that helps us define the task of leadership. And then, when you're a lover, it helps us to weather the cost of leadership. A lot of people want to lead, but they don't want to pay to do it. You notice that? Have you ever noticed we want to cross, but we don't want to bear it? We want the greatest shortcut ever around hardship in our life. And here's the thing. If you and I are going to be influencers, leaders, and if we're truly going hard after Jesus, and he is the lover of our soul, and we just love him supremely, you have to realize Jesus is scared of nothing. He's scared of nothing. He fears no one. So here's the deal. If we follow hard after him, and the task is discipleship, he is going to run us into people that are going to drive us crazy. He is going to put us in life with people that are so different from us. He is going to put us in environments that is going to cause and bring up all kinds of fear and idolatry that we didn't even realize that we had. There will always be a cost. You can't get around that. Here's what Jesus says to Peter. He says simply, "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." And after this, he said to him, Follow me." How would you like that orientation to leadership? Bluntly, how would you like if we all came here tonight and somebody up here just simply says this, "Hey, just to let you know, this is the last night of your life. You are dying tonight." How would you like to? Can you imagine Simon Peter psychologically hearing this? "Hey, Peter, I want to let you know something. There's going to be people who are going to take you where you don't want to go. There's going to be people that are going to humiliate you." And then how does he end it? Follow me. Follow me. Honestly, let me tell you what my flesh does. I want to white out that part of this. Because, see, we have adopted an ethic, many of us in the West, that if we know that something is going to be difficult ahead of us, we go ahead and convince ourselves that it's not God's will for us to do it. But see, there's a cost. But see, you and I are going to avoid the cost if we don't have the heart. We're going to be all jacked up in terms of the task of leadership when there's not the heart. Luke 9, 23 through 26. He said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words of him, will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. There's a cost. It's a cost every time. John Oros, who was a missionary for many years to Romania, talked about the cost that he experienced under extreme communism. He says, during communism, many of us preached and people came at the end of a service and they said, I have decided to become a Christian. We told them, it is good that you want to become a Christian, but we would like to tell you that there is a price to be paid. Why don't you consider what you want to do? Because many things can happen to you. You can lose and lose big. A high percentage of these people chose to take part in a 3-month catechism class. At the end of this period, many participants declared their desire to be baptized. Typically, I would respond, it is really nice that you want to become a Christian, but when you give your testimony, there will be informers here who will jot down your name. Tomorrow, the problems will start. Count the cost. Christianity is not easy. It's not cheap. You could be demoted. You could lose your job. You could lose your friends. You could lose your neighbors. You could lose your kids who are climbing the social ladder. You can lose even your life. Let me tell you my joy. When we looked into the eyes and their eyes were in tears and they told us, and I quote, if I lose everything but my personal relationship with my Lord Jesus Christ, it is still worth it. See, you and I, we'll weather the cost. Do you know why? Because Jesus weathered the greatest cost. And we get him. And he's the jewel of our life. And as I end, when you have a lover's heart, it rivets the focus of leadership. I'm not trying to be cavalier or flippant when I say this. This is the small part of this passage where I laugh inwardly every time I read it. Because I can understand why Simon Peter, after hearing from Jesus that he's going to die, what does Simon Peter do? What about John? What about him? And this is what Jesus says. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who leaned back during the supper. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. I would argue that the ability to focus on one singular passion for your life, for your generation, is one of the biggest battles that you're going to fight. You and I are terrorized every day by things to take our focus. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. You got to have the focus of leadership. Jesus basically says, what I do with him, I do with him. You follow me. Side sermon. Do you know what will kill you in a moment in terms of trying to be an influencer? Is trying to pawn it off on somebody else and trying to compare yourself to somebody else. Quit comparing. God created you in his image. He hardwired your DNA. He gave you a very specific personality. His eyes through the cross were set specifically on you. He purchased you. He gave you sonship. He gave you daughtership. You are his. You are in union with him. So don't be like anybody else. When Apex Community first started, do you know who I was trying to be? It wasn't Jesus. I was trying to be Andy Stanley. I went to every conference that Andy Stanley put on. I bought every book by Andy Stanley. I adopted his leadership style. I never shared this publicly. We adopted their whole ministry philosophy at North Point in Atlanta. And guess what? It failed. And I had to realize, and the Lord had to discipline me. He says, hey, you're not Andy Stanley? You follow me. I'm telling you, when you have a focus that comes out of a lover's heart, it's unstoppable. As I end, and I think you all have heard me enough to know that a lot of my illustrations have to do with missions. And you talk about focus. In 1854, John Patton and his wife, who were Presbyterian missionaries, had a heart for the New Hebrides Islands that are right off of the coast of Australia. The problem is that everybody who lived there were cannibalistic. There were two missionaries who went years before them. Both of them were killed and eaten. So John Patton and his wife set sail in 1854, and they came before the council, the missionary council, and even their own missionary council said, don't go. Isn't that crazy? Don't go. Because, why? Because you're probably going to die. They literally said, they're cannibals. This is what John Patton said to the head guy of the council. Mr. Dixon, replied the young missionary appointee, you are advanced in years now, and your own prospect is soon to be laid in the grave, there to be eaten by worms. I confess to you that if I could but live and die serving and honoring the Lord Jesus, it will make no difference to me whether my body is eaten by cannibals or by worms. And in the great day, my resurrection body will rise as fair as yours in the likeness of our risen Redeemer. I actually want to challenge you not to be a leader. Be a lover. Follow hard after him. Go after him. That'll define the task for you. Not only will that define the task for you, you'll weather the cost. And when you have a lover's heart, you'll be riveted on focus. And the focus of our leadership is not for our glory. The focus of our leadership is Christ. Oh, by the way, they served there for 40 years. Today, there are 85% of those islands are Christian. So, have a lover's heart. We have a great Redeemer. God bless you.